The question is, how do I see myself? Who am I? See, when Okonkwo leaves Umofia, he's rightfully depressed because he is no longer an elder in Umofia. He is now here in this new place where he has not ascended very much. He has to start from the beginning. So, we've often heard these stories, and it's important for us to think about how it applies to our case. That I am no longer the CEO, or I am no longer the who, or what. And what happens when that is taken away? Is it so fundamental to me? Does it ruin me as a person? So Okonkwo has been sent to exile. So he's at his mother's home, Mbata, and he has to rebuild life all over again. And it's hard for him. Achebe tells us that it was like beginning life anew without the vigor and enthusiasm of youth. Of course, imagine if you had to start everything that you'd ever done all over again. He has to cultivate new land, he has to build new huts for his three wives and the children, all that. So it was hard, but Okoko, of course, as always, rises up to the challenge. But there's a very telling statement that we are told here about what is really affecting Okonkwo in rebuilding this. Yes, the rebuilding process itself is very difficult, but also his life had been ruled by a great passion to become one of the lords of the clan. That had been his life spring, and he had all but achieved it. Then everything had been broken. He had been cast out of his clan like a fish onto a dry, sandy beach, panting. It will be good if we take a moment and reflect a little bit about Okonkwo in Banta. And specifically, what I wanted to think about here was his depression because he was no longer in Omofia and he had a trajectory of life in Omofia, or how he was going to ascend and become one of the elders of the clan. And obviously he's torn because that can no longer happen. And the question I was thinking about here is to ponder, for us to just think a little bit about, is a question about our identity. The question is, how do I see myself? Who am I? See, when Okonkwo leaves Umofia, he's rightfully depressed because he is no longer an elder in Umofia. He is now here in this new place where he has not ascended very much. He has to start from the beginning. So, we've often heard these stories, and it's important for us to think about how it applies to our case. That I am no longer the CEO, or I am no longer the who, or what. And what happens when that is taken away? Is it so fundamental to me? Does it ruin me as a person? Or is there an identity that you and I have, which it doesn't matter where we are, it remains stable? And we retain this identity regardless of the environment where we are. It's important to cultivate that other identity, I always think. And obviously, after 7 years, then he will go back and then he can restart again. That is one possibility. But we're in an era where disruption is about to happen. And that's the thing that happens with some of these situations. So we have a very clear path that we are going with, but when disruption comes in, it changes everything. In Omofia, disruption comes in the form of the white man coming in. He not only comes into Omofia, he also comes into Mbata, where Okonkwo is. And then their own people in Bata start joining these people. Neke, who had given birth to twins, consecutively, many, many times. Now is pregnant, and she runs away to go and join this white religion. And they look and they say, she fled to join the Christians. It was good riddance. So the clan is not too concerned about what is going on. Something new that they had never seen has entered their environment. And the reason really why they're not worried is because the people that the new religion is attracting are people who they perceive as being useless people, people that they're not interested in. Which is interesting but these are still their own brothers and sisters. And if their own brothers and sisters are going to this new religion, surely they should have investigated, or they should have been a bit more concerned, but they were not. So the untouchables went there. The women who did not, who wanted to have twins and keep their twins, started joining the new religion, etc. And in the case of our dear Okonkwo, his own son, Noe, runs away to join this new religion. Because remember Noe already wore something in his heart, carried a pain in his heart about the killing of Ikemefuna. So when Noe listened to the stories about this new religion, there was a softness to it and a kindness to it that resonated to him. And what was Okonkwo's reaction when he's told that his son Noe has gone to join this new religion? Well, Okonkwo says this, but on further thought he told himself that Noe was not worth fighting for. Why, he cried in his heart, should he, Okonkwo, of all the people, be cursed with such a son? And now I'm just thinking, if our children or our people at an organizational level are not worth fighting for, then what are we really fighting for? What is worth fighting for? Because at the end of the day, obviously what makes up anything is going to be the people. So perhaps the weakness in this center is that there was not much value for the people who were perceived as being weak, the people who were perceived as being useless. Those are the ones that we were not interested in. We only want the ones who are able to produce, which is a very dangerous approach. You judge a civilization by the way that it treats its weakest members, not its strongest. The survival of the whole community depends on the mercy of the strongest people. And so the attitude of the strongest people is a very important one to always bear in mind. And if we are the strongest people, we have to be very careful about how we treat the weaker ones, the ones that we perceive as being useless. But now the followers of the new religion began to be a bit more daring. There were cases of the young man who killed the sacred python. And the clan starts meeting in Bata, where Okonkwo is, and they ask the question, so what are we going to do about this new religion? What are we going to do about these people? And Okonkwo, typical Okonkwo, looks and he says, let us not reason like cowards, said Okonkwo. If a man comes into my heart and defecates on the floor, what do? Do I shut my eyes? No, I take a stick and break his head. That's what a man does. So Okonkwo, of course, can see what is going on in Bata. And Okonkwo had been a man of war. Okonkwo had been a man of fighting. And so naturally, his prescription is, let's take a big stick and beat these people and chase them away. Because that was the strategy that Okonkwo had always had. And it had always worked for him in the past. But these are people who are new. These are people who clearly are different. And they seem to have a more powerful weapon. I wonder if he had applied his thinking and his warlike strategy to this new situation, they would not have been able to therefore fight the new religion and fight the new people better. But the problem is he is not reading the new situation properly. He is reading this new enemy like any other, and his inability to understand that this enemy is not like the old enemies in the neighboring villages that they used to go to war to is finally going to affect what happens to him. And how could Okonkwo have known or been able to think in a different way if he had taken time to reflect? Back to what we were saying last week, the importance of reflection. And when one sits and reflects very quietly about what is going on, taking into account the new reality, don't ignore reality. Taking into account the new reality, then there's a possibility that we might survive and come out onto the other side. So there we are. In today's session, we were looking at Okonkwo in exile and how during his period in exile, a disruptor came in and how that disruption had an effect on one, Okonkwo's family, and then two, on the very community where the disruption is evolving. We are also reflecting a little bit about identity and who we are and how or what happens to us when our environment changes. Do we remain the same people, or does this change us completely and break us? We also talked a little bit about the importance again of reflection, of critical thinking. And in this process of critical thinking and reflection, it's very important that we also take into account new realities. So the mind has to change. The mind has to be able to be malleable enough to absorb and realize that there's new information that is coming in. And then how am I going to react in the face of this? Next week, Okonkwo goes back to Umuofia. So keep reading and let's see what happens now at the end of Things Fall Apart.